Hi folks, we're looking at the flag with the wild boar of King Richard III from 1485. So a bit more on that later. When I first started the channel, my idea was to review a pair of boots at the start and then after 1,000 kilometers, but I've decided to reduce that time to 500 kilometers plus, because I think that gives me more opportunity to bring you more videos about the boots, and also it's a long enough period to give a fair idea of how a boot is performing. So this is the first review on the KS90 Swiss Army boot. You can look at my original review of the boots, which I posted in December 2020. So now I've covered over 500 kilometers in these. So I just wanted to give you some impressions on the various aspects of the boot. So starting with comfort, initially these boots are quite stiff when you buy them. I mean, mine pair I don't think had ever been issued, so they were quite stiff. They needed quite a bit of breaking in. I would say 100 to 200 kilometers before I felt they were really broken in, and since they've been very comfortable. So I think they're a pair that, like other boots, that the longer you wear them, in fact, the more comfortable they become. On terms of wear, they've done pretty well. There's some wear on the heel there, but overall this is a Vibram licensed sole, and that's performing quite well. So I think from a wear point of view, they would last quite a long time. That's the manufacturer there, and that's the year of manufacturing, 2014. They only have that sort of cast leather lining in the bottom. There's no other linings. There's no Gore-Tex type lining. The waterproofing is taken care of by polishing the outside or using dubbing, etc. And I've used the polish on these that I received in the Swiss Army kit that I've also reviewed, and I've used that polish on them, and it does a good job, as you can see. So a very waterproof boot if you take care of them. From a practicality point of view, I think that, again, for UK conditions, for a lot of period of the year, they would be a very practical boot. There might be some days when it's extremely hot that they would be too heavy for that sort of time, but most of the time, certainly the winter, the autumn, spring, and even during lots of the summer in the UK when it rains a lot, then these boots would really do a good job for you. So if you were just looking for one pair to do all year pretty well, then they would do that. So I think they're a very sort of practical type boot for UK conditions. They've got the speed lace system, which is quite good. They've got quite a thick sort of cushion between the boot and the outsole, which I found to be quite comfortable. So I think overall they're good value for money. And I paid £40 for these, but I know you can pick them up for £30, and I see they're for sale not just in the UK, but they're being sold in America and throughout Europe. So the Swiss have obviously downloaded a lot of pairs, because they've now moved to 2 pairs of Aku boots, because I believe they changed their camouflage system. Why they just didn't keep these boots and change the colour, I'm not sure, because as I say, I think they're an excellent quality pair of boots, extremely well made, and I think will last a long time. They can be resold or recrafted, as they say in America. If you looked after the uppers, in fact there's a YouTube video about a Swiss bootmaker or cobbler complaining about lack of trade since they've moved to the new type boots. So if you looked after them, then the outsole wears out, you could resole them, and that'd be, I think, a worthwhile consideration, because these will last a pretty long time looked after. So there we are, that's the Swiss KS90 boots. Just looking at the battlefield of Bosworth there, which we're going to talk about again. So just some more views of the boot. Again, the manufacturer, size. Just some overall views, what they look like after 500 plus kilometres. And where I was originally at the Battlefield Memorial site, heritage site, I've now moved to another location which is actually closer to the actual battlefield, called the village of Dadlington, and we're going to look at the churchyard there and some interesting aspects related to the Battle of Bosworth Field. So bear with me and we'll take some more views of the church at Dadlington. And this is the church St James. It dates back from I think the 13th century. What's interesting here is some of the soldiers from the Battle of Bosworth were buried in this churchyard in mass graves, and that's 1485. And separated by something like 430 odd years, there's another soldier buried in this churchyard from a different war. So in recent years they've discovered that the Battle of Bosworth Field was far closer to this location than they originally thought, and over the years the remains were found and buried in the churchyard. As late as 1880 the local paper was chronicling they were finding during the ploughing season the skeleton remains of the soldiers and the rusted armour, and they in turn were interned in the churchyard here. So as we enter the church, they've reopened it now, even though COVID's still going on, you can come inside, as you can see. It's been renovated over the years, obviously. Originally, as I say, built during the late 13th century. And there's a plaque on the wall to one of the soldiers from the village, and this is a small village, that died during the First World War. And these we can see some of the archways and the original stonework of the original building there, which is being renovated. And there's the oak beams supporting the roof. So 5 soldiers from the village died during the First World War, all on the Western Front, and a further man died during the Second World War from this small village, and there's a little plaque there outlining their names. Most of them were buried in France or had no known graves, but one of them is actually buried here in the churchyard, which we'll take a look at. And there's a little bit of story going on in here about the Battle of Bosworth Field. And if you're looking at this from outside the UK, that's in Leicestershire, which is in the central location of England. And it was in August 1485 with King Richard III, who died during the battle. He was the last king to die in battle. And that's just telling a little bit of the story about some of the bodies that were buried in the churchyard, telling the story of the village itself and the current church, St James. Links to the battlefield, which was very close by, and they discovered in recent years Richard's personal emblem from his bodyguard, and that's how they knew. And they also found some cannonballs, so they knew where the battle was closer than they thought to this place than the original location. So if you're interested in this and you got the time, there's various places you can come to. Obviously you can come to this church. You can go to the Heritage Centre where those flags were I pointed out, and you'll see on my original video. And you can also visit City of Leicester, where Richard is now buried in the cathedral. So it's an interesting story if you get the opportunity to come here and have a look. So we'll just go outside and we'll have a look at the graveyard, and we'll have a look at perhaps some more views of where it's thought the battle has taken place. It's battlefield type weather today when you see the dark clouds. That's a pub across the road. So there, in the distance is where those flags are again, and in the foreground is more where they feel the battle had taken place, and certainly men were buried in this churchyard from that battle. The common soldiers were often placed in mass graves, and then the knights might have been taken home to their own parishes and their own families, but the ordinary common soldier were just buried either on the battlefield or buried in the nearest church like this in mass graves. And I think, there we go. There's the it's a bit shaky at this point because of my camera work, I'm afraid, but we'll see the standards come into position again. There we are. That's the standard come in position. And if you look at my original video on the KS90 boot, you'll see the close-up shots from that location. Okay, so we're just going to visit now the grave of one of the soldiers who died in the First World War, and he was wounded on the Western Front, but he was brought then back to the UK for hospital treatment, but sadly died, and therefore his family were able to bury him in this graveyard where all the other soldiers either have no known graves or are buried in France, and they all died on the Western Front. I think 3 of them during the real heavy battles of 1917, and a couple of them at the start of the First World War. So this is the grave of Private Walter Towers. Died in 1917, and he just turned 19 years of age. So separated by 430 years plus from all the soldiers who were buried in here from the Battle of Bosworth. I think there was an estimated 1,000 to 1,500 men died in the Battle of Bosworth Field. Probably not all buried in this churchyard. And of course, as many churchyards in the UK that go back centuries, you'll see very old graves dating from 1700s, 1600s, etc. So So there's the windows, and the side of the windows you got the really weather-beaten figures, which would have been original figures when the church was built, slowly being changed by time. So I hope you found this interesting, this little trip back in time. And so it's a small village in Leicestershire. There's one of the really old graves. I think that dated back to 1703 from memory. And of course on the Western Front, what is famous in sort of British terms was the poppies were growing on the battlefields. And there's some wild poppies here. So stay safe out there. Take care.